Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for May 21st, 2014. This program provides network security highlights, discussions, and countermeasures for cyber threats. I'm joined today by Jim Clausing online here. And Jim, tell us just briefly what you've been doing for the last week or so.
Well, I've spent some time getting myself back up to speed on a couple of forensic tools that we use that I personally haven't used in a while. And I've got an idea for another tool that I want to add to one of our automated malware analysis environments. So I'm working on that script.
All right, that's cool. You know, I think for our audience, it's important to keep the practice up. Make sure that you're up to speed on the forensics techniques and things so that when there is an incident or a problem that you need to work through, it's not a learning process as well as handling the incident. So appreciate your work there. Joined here by Matt Kaiser. Matt, what have you been up to?
Actually, this last week I was on vacation, which is, you know, we work pretty hard here, so every once in a while you need some time to sort of not think about analysis.
Absolutely.
And I feel a little more refreshed and ready to go. So,
All right, did a little traveling.
a little traveling, yeah. Went to Italy,
Cool.
saw some nice sights, had some nice food, and relaxed.
Great, welcome back. And we're also joined by John in Hogoboom. And John, you've been busy over the last week as well. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of talks and presentations with customers, talking about cybersecurity issues, how we do what we do, how we might be able to help them, and kind of getting some feedback from what they do and their concerns, which helps feed into our service offerings and whatnot. So, you know, like we've discussed, doing analysis is just one part of our job, but talking with customers and getting engaged is another thing that we like to do on occasion so that we keep up to date with what their needs are and what they're doing and experiencing.
Absolutely, appreciate it. So let's go right into it here. And our first story here, I guess, is about a group that's doing their malicious activities. What can you tell us, Matt?
So, Elderwood first came to light around 2012. It's more of, and it's still kind of fuzzy, more of a platform / development house for exploits and exploitation. Was used back in 2012 as part of the Aurora attacks, which, if you remember, that was a lot of high-profile targets were hacked. And it seems they're still continuing to work even to this day in 2014. In fact, 3 brand new 0 days came out of this shop, we believe, in the first month of 2014. Now, Symantec has a really great write-up on it, and they actually speculate a little bit as to the layout of how this group operates. They have 2 main theories. The first one is that this is a sort of a master shop that has smaller teams which it sort of assigns the work to and provides the exploits and the exploit kits. The other possibility is that this is a group that sells the exploits to these other smaller groups, so there's not a direct command and control, but rather a marketplace. So it's maybe you consider a very specific and closed marketplace for these high-value exploits. I found it personally interesting because you don't get to see much analysis on how the groups themselves operate. Mostly you get technical details, here's the malware, here's what it does, but it's more of showing the roots behind from an organizational standpoint. There are several groups that were listed, several campaigns. Hidden Links and IceFog are 2 that viewers may be familiar with. All in all, I thought it was a great article, and I think it sort of gives sort of a view into how things sort of operate from a political or a operational standpoint you don't often get.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of threat intelligence in the sense that, you know, the more you can understand the actors and the tools that they're using, it helps to develop some insight into how their techniques might change over time or how they might not change. And, you know, sometimes it's the things that don't change that give you an opportunity to be able to detect them better and get working on the mitigation or at least even prevention if at all possible. So absolutely, I think you know, that sort of article is very valuable in that sense.
And understanding how these actor sets have relationships with each other is important to kind of get a sense of how these different groups and operations might interlink with each other in some kind of maybe master plan type of thing going on.
So a lot of the different Elderwood groups were targeting different industrial sector and aerospace and things like that, and that may suggest, you know, heavily that they're involved in, you know, IP theft. Whereas if you had another group, you would see that they're mostly, you know, interested in money, and they would have a whole different structure in the way that they're operating and getting new jobs.
Yeah. Now, Jim, you've done a lot of work in sort of tracking and getting some idea of how some of the 0 days have taken place and the mechanisms behind it. Have you seen any trends? Has it been an increasing, or are we kind of stable? Do you think these groups have a significant influence on that?
It seems pretty stable. There are groups out there that are actively looking for these things and developing them and sharing them. I haven't actually read a whole lot about Elderwood and how it's working, but we see the 0 days coming all the time, and it seems to be a lot of the same bad actors that seem to keep finding them. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're certainly well tooled for being able to find these 0 days, and there are obviously some tools and techniques behind it that, as we get deeper into these, hopefully we'll get some better insights in how that's taking place.
Well, the article does speak to that a little bit and says that the exploits themselves are you could reverse engineer them, but to turn out this many in such a short period of time suggests either you've got a really great underground marketplace for buying these exploits, or you've got some serious developers who are able to create them on their own. So either way, whoever's behind Elderwood is fairly well resourced.
Right. Well, and then there's always that possibility that the source code that they're finding the 0 days in has been stolen.
That's a very good point. And they do seem to focus primarily on Adobe and Internet Explorer. So
drive-by vectors.
Exactly. Watering hole tile attacks.
Right, absolutely. All right, so let's go on to the next topic here. And the next one here is, we're talking about 0 days. This perhaps is not a 0 day per se, but certainly an exploit event here. So, Jim, what can you tell us about what's going on with eBay?
This one just hit the press, in the last 24 hours, and so there's still a fair amount that we don't know about exactly what happened. But eBay posted a notice on one of their blogs today saying that starting today they were going to ask all their users to change their passwords. And actually, first notice of this showed up on a PayPal thing last night. PayPal is owned by eBay, but seems to be gone now. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, if there was some miscommunication internally. But anyway, what appears to have happened is that several accounts were compromised back in late February or early March. Some reports that I've read suggest that it was spear phishing attacks. A few of these eBay employees' accounts were compromised, and at some point in late February or early March, the bad guys exploited the credentials that they had stolen and used them to access a database that contained some information about eBay customers. It included their names, their encrypted passwords, addresses, phone numbers, and birth dates. But eBay says that they became aware of the credentials being exploited about 2 weeks ago and did some forensic investigation, and that's how they discovered the database had been compromised. So they're urging everybody to change your passwords on eBay. They claim that none of the PayPal info was touched. That's it's a subsidiary, but the databases are separate there. But I know some folks who are suggesting changing their PayPal passwords too. Obviously, if you use the same password both places, that's not a good thing, and so you should change that. There was some information here that could potentially be used for identity theft, but there was no social security numbers, but date of birth and address and phone number associated with the names is kind of sensitive information. So be on the lookout if you're an eBay customer. Keep track of folks potentially trying to use this information for identity theft. There's no indication at present that it has been used for that, but given the nature of some of the information that was in this database, is something to be on the lookout for. I'm sure we'll learn more in the days and weeks to come. As I said, this just hit the press in the last 24 hours, so there's not a whole lot of information out there yet. But since it was hitting the press, I thought it was something we should at least mention to our viewers.
Now, was there any information that indicated how many customers may have been affected by this?
I have not seen any numbers on how many customers that are in this database, but I suspect we'll find that out here in the next few days.
Okay. So, I mean, in comparison, though, this is not a circumstance where credit card information has been stolen. It sounds like, or at least that's not what they're saying at this point. It's really just, name and address. So,
right. They were pretty clear in their blog post that the credit card information was kept in a separate database, and that does not appear to have been compromised.
Right.
So it was usernames, customer names, encrypted passwords, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth.
Right. Well, and as I think we've talked about many times before, even though it's an encrypted password, you still have the opportunity to do some pretty aggressive guessing against that password and ultimately be able to crack the password, at least for a large number of the users. There are probably quite a number that don't have really enormously complex passwords. That would be the avenue for folks to be able to get access to users' accounts and perhaps abuse them in another way. Right?
Absolutely. They've potentially had, 2.5 months to try to crack these passwords offline. So I'd say it's a safe bet. The passwords that weren't particularly strong have been cracked, and whether they've actually been used or not is another story. But eBay's advice and my advice is change your eBay password today.
Personally, as a general rule, and I'm personally not an eBay user, so I don't know the specific circumstances around it. But when I do online purchases, I've tended to not, keep a credit card stored as a part of the account. That is to give some flexibility as a user anyway. I don't know if that. Do you know if that happens to extend to this case as well?
I honestly haven't. I used eBay once years ago, and I'm not an eBay user myself, so I honestly don't remember.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Okay.
I know I do with Amazon because it makes it so easy to just one-click buy and purchase things.
Yeah, they do.
One thing I will say is that eBay and PayPal offer a second-factor authentication token. I do use that.
Okay.
So that should help to mitigate some losses if you have one of those, and if you don't, go ahead and get
it's
one.
it's a good suggestion to take advantage of two-factor authentication, and it helps to protect you against this sort of attack.
Absolutely.
Very
Whenever two-factor is available, you should be taking advantage of it.
All right. So let's go to the next topic here, and we always are advocates of layers of security. John, what can you tell us?
Well, no matter how many layers you put in, basically the story is you're not necessarily guaranteed to be protected.
Right. So
I actually have my low-tech analog tablet here. Matt's got a digital nice one, but there are a lot of numbers, so I want to make sure I got the facts right here. But FireEye and Mandiant, in conjunction, because now they're kind of one and the same. They were reviewing some data between the October 2013 and March 2014 timeframe, about a 6-month timeframe, for about 1,600 networks that their devices cover. 97% of those had some form of breach. Now, it could be botnet. That's not all APT, but some form of botnet or exploit attempts against their enterprise. All of these companies did have some sort of defense in depth. So they had firewalls, they had IDSs, IPSs, they have endpoint antivirus. So it's not like they just have one type of solution. They've got layered security. Even with all that, 97% of them were compromised at some point for some length of time. They saw 208,000 malware downloads in that time frame and 124,000 unique malware variants, which is pretty impressive. But nowadays we know that they're so rapidly recompiling and changing the malware samples that that's not necessarily surprising to me that it's so oftenly changing. The one other interesting thing was that 27% of those participants that they collected this data from did experience events that would be consistent with tools and techniques that APT actors use. So that's important. The long and short is, for your general security, having just some regular type of security layer would be sufficient. Having a more defense in depth, at least it gives you some time to evaluate what's going on, and maybe one of these devices will pick up part of it that's happening. You'll be able to kind of stem the tide a little bit, and cut off the attacker before they are able to do any kind of damage.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right here. There's when I think of layers of security, I think of it as an opportunity to buy some time.
Right.
That is, as an attacker is going through, if it truly is a layer of security, they're going to bump up against one thing. That's an opportunity to detect it and be aware that there is a threat, that there's motivation, that they're looking for weaknesses, and that would be the opportunity to find ways to passively observe. That is, one of the factors and we, in fact, we went through a discussion on a similar topic last week, where I think Stan was talking about the malware that disabled the network interface to help avert from being analyzed. Well, we know that the attackers are testing their wares, their attacks against the commercial security products, and they're looking for ways around those. And to the extent that they're doing that, it's that passive analysis activity. Of course, we're analysts here, so I tend to be biased toward the analysis approach to things, but I think it's an important factor, and that we'll call it the kill chain, credited to Lockheed Martin, where they said what you're looking for are the sequence of events associated with an attack, and each one of those is an opportunity to take it down.
Right.
So very important that you have the layers to buy some time so that you can detect it and do have an opportunity to block it before the attack becomes damaging.
I was going to ask, the 27% that saw APT techniques, did they elaborate on what techniques those were?
They did not elaborate, at least not that I saw. And it's also, I'm not quite sure, just because the techniques and tactics are APT in nature doesn't necessarily mean that it's a nation state actor.
Right.
However, there's probably a good amount of those that are nation state, because they tend to manifest themselves in a more unique way than your regular malware on your network when you do see.
Tend to be a little more specialized, although
Right.
I think that the distinction in terms of techniques, I think, is probably going to be continuing to blur. That is, as the non-nation state sponsored attackers get more focused on specific monetary methods. We've seen an awful lot of cases where like Zeus has become more specialized or focused on particular targets. There isn't really a strong distinction between the two. I think in the end what it comes down to is the type of target they go after, the type of information they steal, if that's the case, or what actions they perform is going to be the real strong distinction between the two.
Right.
All right, very good. Next item here, I guess what we'll do is take a little bit of a look at a particular form of malware, and Matt, you took a look at this one.
Yep. So this is big in the news now. FBI has announced that they have, in coordination with a number of law enforcement agencies across the world, arrested, or at least given other people the opportunity to arrest, people related to the Blackshades remote access Trojan, remote access tool. Blackshades has been around for a while. I remember when I first came here, it was one of the first things that I took some time to look at. It's a very full-featured remote access Trojan, all the standard features you would expect, password stealing, key logging, the works, basically. Web camera. It's
Microphone.
Yes, and that actually came into play. Blackshades was used famously. It was Miss Teen America of one of the previous years. Someone used Blackshades against her on her own personal computer. So people, this one has been around for a while, not only with Miss Teen America, but I believe activists in Syria and some other country had somebody use this against them.
Yeah, this is one that really struck me in the creep factor.
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. It's intrusive is the long and short of it. But it seems that FBI's gone ahead, seized, I believe it was 1,900 domains related to Blackshades, shut down the main website, and somehow obtained information to find the customers of the main Blackshades website to either contact, raid, or arrest them as well. And it varied depending on which country it was. But this is a huge action to take against a single piece of malware. And I think that's the difference here, is that it's the malware itself that's the common thread between the arrests and the takedown. It's not any particular group of actors. It's not as if you had, a gang somewhere that happened to be using Blackshades. It's the malware is the focus of it. I think it sends a message more than anything else that, these sort of rats are available. Blackshades was available for like $45 on the internet at the low end. But I think this is more of a message to say, this is not going to be tolerated any longer.
Right.
Even though some of this stuff is sold as, remote administration tools for legitimate purposes, not that Blackshades was, but this is going to sort of, I'm not sure, this is drawing the line in the sand, I guess is the right metaphor for it.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And there were some sort of special circumstances around this, if I understand correctly. We're and to some extent this was speculation, but we were talking a little bit earlier about how there appeared to be some central command and control associated with this. Is even though you bought the malware and used the malware, that there actually was sort of a home for it, some cloud-based aspect to it.
I'm not sure of the details myself. I was under the impression that the domains that were being provided were part of the package. You would buy Blackshades, but you would also get yourself like a dynamic domain somewhere that someone had set up for you to allow the infections to connect back to it. Right. So it was partly the malware, but partly also a service aspect to it as well, is my understanding.
Okay.
The other interesting aspect of this case, I think, is that it was a global type of initiative. And one of the things I observed about this is in other countries they have different laws than we have in the United States. So the depth of prosecution and I guess warrants and what they can do is very different depending on what country that particular person was in. So you might see that there was more actual legal action occurring against users of this software in other countries like places, Europe and Australia, I think, was another one that had a lot of people. So interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I guess this is one of these cases where I think the move toward greater deterrence is a positive thing, and it's really a matter of keeping that balance. Obviously, you want to protect the freedoms of be able to experiment with things, learn about types of attacks that could take place, so that you can protect yourself against it. But at the same time, making sure that it's not used in an abusive way.
And that is a good point. That Blackshades was so cheap that if you wanted to research the malware yourself, you may as well just drop the $45 and buy yourself a copy. But if that puts you on the list of possible prosecution, that's a dangerous sort of thing to do. If you're a legitimate malware researcher or you're some criminal, then you're on the same list at that point.
Yeah. Well, we don't know the facts about whether it was simply purchasing or if it was observed use of that malware that was actually was being scrutinized here.
Correct.
I presume it's the latter.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so here. And first thing we have on our list of activities that have been taking place, this is consistent with what we reported last week. We've seen a lot of scan probes on port 53 TCP. This is DNS. Most DNS is on 53 UDP, but TCP is also used for zone transfers, in particular when you need to do a large transfer of activity. This looks like probing activity that is scanning around the internet, most likely looking for DNS servers that perhaps are willing to facilitate a zone transfer. We're looking at 60 days of activity here, and as you can see, there's fairly regular spikes of activities. Clearly over the last 30 days, there was also some activity that dated back a little bit further as well. Most of these probes are from a single address in China. It's been consistently that way. Pretty aggressive scanning activity on a regular basis. Next item here is scan probes on port 1900 UDP. Again, this is one that we reported on last week. A lot of this activity I believe to be innocuous. That is not necessarily malicious in behavior. As we talked about before, the port 1900 is a simple service discovery protocol, but as with any UDP port or any UDP service, it could potentially be used for at least a reflection attack, that is a denial of service attack, using the server to reflect packets that have a spoof source address. And this is one that has the potential to the service has the potential to provide some amplification as well. So we're seeing this activity in terms of scanning activity, and as we reported last week, it still is consistently showing mostly activity from Russia that is performing this scanning activity. And next item here is the top 10 most probed ports. I guess the 400-pound gorilla in the room here is the activity on port 22 TCP. Followed by port 445 TCP, which, if you recall, if you've been following this program for a while, 445 always used to be at the top of the list, and now it's kind of buried along with a number of others. Next being port 80 TCP, and then port 23 TCP, that's Telnet, 443 TCP, that's SSL, or encrypted web access, port 3389 TCP, which is a remote desktop protocol. We've talked numerous times before about port 53 UDP, which is next, and then 1433 TCP, which is Microsoft SQL database. Last but not least, port 8080 TCP. Since we have this 400-pound gorilla in the room here, I thought we'd take a little bit closer look at the activity on port 22 TCP. And interestingly enough, this is something that we have shared from time to time. It's been some time since we've looked at this, but in this particular case, there was, sort of a unique observation. That is, what we're looking at here is what I call the probe aggression factor. Basically, it is the number of probes per source that we're observing. This aggression factor that we're seeing on port 22 is actually higher than any other that I've observed before, at least in recent memory. And it's compared here with the others that are on the top 10 list, and you can see where some of these are clearly more aggressive than others. The significance of this is that, particularly for TCP protocols, when you're doing a probe, if you're doing it in a conventional way, you send out a SYN request and you have to wait for a SYN ACK, and then you can start to continue, or you can reset or move on. This appears to be that there's code that's been written to do that in a more efficient way, that basically spray out the SYNs, see what responses come back, and not really wait for it. You just continue to move forward. So this aggression factor is just another one of those things that you can use as a means to help understand a little bit better whether the scanning activity is crafted specially for scanning, that is using an application specifically for that, as opposed to perhaps some other activity that might be related to that port.
It sounds like the ZMap tool that was released in the last year or so. I think it was optimized to do exactly that, is to send as much traffic as possible without keeping those sockets necessarily waiting.
Right, and that certainly has existed for some time. We've seen that and evidence of that sort of characteristic. This one seems to have taken it just a little bit further. And taking just a longer term look at the activity on port 22 TCP. This is specifically scanning activity, the scan probes on port 22 TCP. This graph goes back 180 days. This is what we've, to a large extent, attributed to scanning for devices on the internet that would be vulnerable to some sort of, usually a password guessing attack. Most of these probes, as well as the sources themselves, happen to be from China here. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. This could potentially be associated with the security surveillance cameras, is that right?
Potentially, because we know that they do scan for that, as well as 23 TCP and the 5000 TCP.
Right.
At least some pockets of them were involved in that,
Yeah, absolutely. So we're certainly seeing a lot of aggressive scanning on this port, and it seems to be in an upward trend overall. Next item here is the most sources doing the probing, and again, we see at the top of the list here port 443 TCP. Now, we've been reporting this as potentially related to the Heartbleed. I don't believe it is actually related to Heartbleed. I think there's somewhat of a coincidence. We're going to take a quick look at this in a moment here. But followed by port 445 TCP, and this, as we've mentioned many times, is related to sort of latent configure infected devices. Followed by port 23, port 80 TCP, port 8080 TCP, and then we have a couple of ports that are showing up here that are still associated with the peer-to-peer activity of the zero access botnet. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at port 443 TCP activity. This has been the trend, is we're looking at specifically in this case the number of sources that are doing that probing, and it's up into around 9,000 sources that are doing that probing activity now. And we're looking at 60 days of activity in this particular graph. Most of the sources are from Argentina. We're going to take a look at a geographic map of that in a moment. There are also some associated with a U.S. university, and we think that that is actually what I'll describe as innocuous, probably probing around looking for Heartbleed vulnerable devices, and what I think they've been doing is basically tracking the status of the remediation of that Heartbleed vulnerability. I wanted to point out as well is that some of the more aggressive sources of scanning activity happen to be from China in this case. So as I said, we'll take a quick look at the geographic, what we call heat map, associated with these sources of scanning activity on port 443. As you can see here, the real heat, that is what we're doing here is counting the number of sources. That is, we're not factoring in the number of probes from those sources, just looking for concentrations of sources that are doing that probing. And the real hotspot is down here in Argentina relative to the rest of the world.
And I took a look at this a few weeks ago. It appears these devices are some sort of embedded device or a router that's provided to customers.
Oh, really?
Of an ISP that provides service in that
Okay.
area.
So
So,
it could be-
I suspect that there's maybe some vulnerability in that type of device that somebody has discovered, and they, harvesting a botnet out of a large number of them in that particular ISP provider.
See.
That's what my money was on too.
Yeah.
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 I have a real hunch.
So they would do well to identify that problem and get it
fix it.
addressed as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's our show for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrack@list.att.com. You can follow us on Twitter, and our handle there is @ThreatTraq. ThreatTraq video is available on the AT&T Tech channel. It's att.com/ThreatTraq, and it's also available on the AT&T Tech channel on YouTube. There's an audio-only version also available on iTunes. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Jim, for joining us online. Thank you, John. Thank you, Matt. We'll be back next week with a new episode, and until then, keep your network safe.